Hi, it's John Wren, and this is the Startup Show, sponsored by your small business Chamber of Commerce. We'd like to help you do more good work. Today, this is a special edition of the Startup Show. I'm going to talk about where we've come from, where we're at now, where we see ourselves going, and what difference it might make to you. If you're starting something new, hopefully this next few minutes will be very, very helpful to you. And if you've started and would like to help other people get started, we hope that this kind of lays a foundation for ways that we can work with each other to accomplish that. The Small Business Chamber of Commerce is a virtual group. The office is in my apartment, 1881 Bucktail Boulevard, right across the street from the University of Denver. Right on the light rail stop is right next door. I can step out. It's sort of like taking an elevator downtown. So this is a great location. And our purpose is to try to offer an alternative to the SBDC approach to startup. We want to cooperate with local chambers and help people that are members of the chamber or staff members of the chamber start something that's an alternative to the SBDC approach. SBDC, Small Business Development Centers, have been planted by the Small Business Administration and are supported by a lot of money from the SBA. 250,000 or so is not unusual. And with that, they may start 3 or 4 new businesses and feel like it was a good effort. I believe they talk about startup in a way that's actually harmful. I believe that very few businesses start the way the SBA says that they should start. And that's why I started doing these kinds of things. It started with a TV show. I was doing the marketing for a small theater, and one thing led to another, and I ended up with a weekly show, John Wren's TV Journal, and it was a lot of fun. Each week we'd ask someone in the arts to come and talk about how they got started. And then we'd also ask a business person to come and talk about how they started their business. And what evolved out of that was a group that was meeting after the TV show to meet the guest. And what I learned was a very, very interesting thing, and it supported my own biases at that point, which I had certain beliefs about how startup worked. But it really was verified when week after week after week, I heard these people talk about how they started, especially in the private group after the show. Not so much on air. People tend to fall into the standard startup story. I did research, I did planning. You should do more research, you should do more planning, which is the conventional wisdom. But we'd get together face to face and they'd say, well, let me tell you what really happened. And I came to believe that businesses are like snowflakes. Everyone is a little bit different. And what you have to do is to respond to your particular situation. But the universal seems to be that all of a sudden you're doing business and money's coming in. And if that's not the quality, it may be that your business is not going to be successful. So I started doing a bit more on the air, a bit more with this idea association, we called it back then, after the show, to talk along those lines. And one day I came to the realization that I didn't have any theoretical underpinning for what I was talking about. And if I couldn't find any, then I was going to throw in the sponge. I was going to quit talking about startup. Now, this was before the World Wide Web. This is back when you had bulletin boards. And we had one of the first business bulletin boards in Denver on University of Colorado Health Science Center had Denver Freenet. And we had put a bulletin board up. They had tried to get the chambers of commerce, every business group they could think of to do it. None of the businesses were interested, but there we were with the Idea Association, our bulletin board here in Denver, getting the word out about our meetings. And I went on the bulletin boards and started surfing around the way you did it back then. And I came across, looking for this theoretical underpinning, I came across an article in the Harvard Business Review called How Successful Entrepreneurs Craft Their Strategies by Dr. Amar Bahidi. And I looked at the date, and it was the current issue of the Harvard Business Review. And that was astonishing. This is back in the days when if you used an index to periodical literature, you had to wait till it was published. And so way after the fact, you could find a particular periodical index. But here's an index online that gave me the current issue, and it was exactly the article. I thought I can get in my car and drive over to Newsland and get a copy of that right now. And that's what I did. And I read through the article. And Dr. Bahidi for years had been sending his students out to talk to the founders of successful businesses, successful defined as being Inc. 500, which you can argue with that as a definition of success, but you know, it's one definition of success. And what his students had found is that consistently, these successful startups did not do what the Small Business Administration had been recommending. They did do not any formal research, usually none. And they didn't do formal planning, usually none. They get customers, money comes in. Now they may tidy up with those things later, but to get from zero to first sale is, you know, what this country has been built on is people getting an idea and then going out and seeing if it works. It's a market economy. If market research and careful planning works as well as the SBA and the Kauffman people and everybody else, all the university programs, the business plan competitions, if market research and planning worked that well, we wouldn't have a market economy, we would have a planned economy, but we don't, because the market is much more effective at sorting these things out. So you try a little, if it starts working, the money starts coming in, you follow the money and it grows. Now, is that what I've done with the Small Business Administration? No, I'm radically hypocritical in this regard, although I have had no money in, no money out. This has been a labor of love. It's taken decades to get to where we are now. And what I'm going to do today is talk with you about where we are now. This is back in the beginning. I'm talking Dr. Bahidi. The TV show became a radio show, and it was much easier. You didn't have to get dressed up. You didn't have to get your guests to dress up. So once it was on the radio, it was easier to do. But I had, the first 2 times I had the radio station just go off the air. I'd get on the air, start to build a little bit of an audience, and then the station went off the air. That happened twice. The third time, something else happened that brought the show to an end. But the fact is that what I also was learning is that what happened in these face-to-face meetings was far different than what happened in the broadcast. What happened on the broadcast, and Dr. Bahidi said he had the same thing happen in his classes on entrepreneurship at Harvard University. He would invite successful business people to come in and talk about how they'd started. And they would almost invariably talk about how important it was that before you did anything, you did very careful market research. Don't just go on your own personal whim. It might sound good to you, but who knows, maybe. So you've got to do market research, and you've got to do formal strategic planning the way that you're taught to do it here at Harvard. And, you know, that's a very important skill. You've got to make sure that it's comprehensive and that people agree with you that this is a good idea. Show the plan around. And then Dr. Bahidi would ask them, well, now looking at your own business, whatever business it was, looking back at that very first customer you got, had you done those things before the first sale, that first customer? Well, no, I didn't, but it would have been a lot better if I would have, they would say consistently. And of course, who knows if it would have been better? They might not have even gotten started. And that's what happens to a lot of businesses right now. They've bought into this myth of market research and planning that the startup rate is way, way, way down. We are starting fewer and fewer businesses. And that's even given the fact that most of the startups in the statistics today are guys like me in their bathrobe at their kitchen table, and they count that as a startup. That's not a startup. they shouldn't be saying that it is. But even given all of those people, the startup rate is down. And what's really drastically down is businesses from 10 to 100 employees. And in my opinion, the business with 10 to 100 employees is the bedrock of our economy. And that is a business large enough that the owner can leverage his time through other people and is not tied to the business, but not so large that the business owner then becomes consumed with the normal corporate sort of thing. Because the large corporations, they may have many benefits in terms of economy of scale. I don't fight them except, in the marketplace. I think they shouldn't be allowed to use force or fraud, but let them serve the customer and let's have some competition. So, but the corporate life is a grind, and there is a real fall off in participation and democracy in our it's not exactly a democracy. That's a misnomer, but that's what everybody says. It's a republic, not a democracy. But our system of government, as Dwight Eisenhower said, requires that it be the part-time occupation of every citizen. And that part-time occupation is much harder in the corporate life. And eventually they retire and they can catch up and do a lot of good stuff after retirement. But for the 20, 30 years that sometimes people are in the corporate grind, their participation in some of our civic ventures is going to be minimal. The little guy like me, normally you'd have a hard time participating. Some do, and it's at a great personal sacrifice. But the business with 10 to 100 employees, the owner's time is leveraged. They can get away from it. Jim Kreutz, he ran for whatever office it was, and I saw him on spring break. We took our kids to Padre Island together, not together, but we ended up at the same place, and we played tennis every day out in the rain. It rained the entire week we were at Padre Island. But Jim said to me that the one thing he'd learned is that he would never run again unless he had some independent source of revenue, a print shop or something. He said, if these people with a professional practice or that type of thing can do it. But if you don't have that and you're tied to a corporate life, it's just impossible to be an effective candidate or a leader of a party. For the most part, there's always exceptions, but for the most part, this decline in businesses from 10 to 100 is a real bad sign for. Now, what's the result? Edmund Phelps, Nobel Prize winning economist, his most recent book called Mass Flourishing, says that what's happened is late 60s, early 70s, there's been a radical drop in the vitalism and dynamism of the economy. That it used to be everybody going to work was thinking of how they could do their job better. Today, 80% of the people hate their job. Now, where does this come from? I believe it's the bottled up nature of things now, because we've all bought into this market research and strategic planning BS that's been propagated. Where did the SBA come from? What's its effect been? You look at small business now, small business back in 1953 when the SBA has started, and you've got to say the effect of the SBA has been very, very negative as far as small business is concerned. Now they'll say, well, look at all these people starting, but most of them are, again, guys in the bathrobe like me at the kitchen table. Those aren't businesses. Starting businesses, it came out in 1953 because Dwight Eisenhower, a good man, I believe, was as good as any. I mean, none of us are perfect, but he wanted to get the economy moving. They came up with the idea of the Veterans Home Loan Program. A lot of veterans had come back from World War II, had put money into homes, and if they could free that up or get them to take loans to build new homes. And so what do you need to build a home? You need a lot, you need blueprints, you need a plan. And so that's what they were focused on. And Eisenhower was focused on it here in Denver. And I happen to know someone who was able to eavesdrop on the conversation. This is his observation, firsthand observation he passed on to me. And so they were doing this for homes, and then they had the bright idea, well, if we do this with businesses, a lot of these veterans would borrow money and go into business, and that's where the SBA came from. Well, building a house and starting a business are two different enterprises. Now, as far as the military mindset, there may be not that much difference. The military mindset is we do planning. big oxymoron, military intelligence, because it is so big. It has to do these plans in advance, and you do what you're told, and it's a very much top-down operation. For the most part, McChrystal and the rest, we're getting away from that. You want to empower the soldier so the whole world's moving it. But back with President Eisenhower, the way he thought, what the SBA was charged with made perfect sense, except for the little fact that it's not the way businesses actually got started. It's the way that they thought maybe businesses should get started. And so that should has been passed on, and especially it becomes worse the more it's passed on. I mean, I saw this, I worked for Mountain Bell, and I helped with part of the Bell system that did telephone sales training. Part of their training was you should never use a script. Oh, really? Now, I'd been in telemarketing. I knew how successful telemarketing operations worked, and they always had a script. But here's Bell, generation after generation, saying, no, you really shouldn't use a script. Not true. You should use a script, but be trained how to use it so it doesn't sound like you're scripted. And we repositioned telephone sales into telemarketing, the professional use of the telephone, and revenues went through the roof, but they kept teaching the old dogma. And, a lot of people got hurt because you'd set up things and they wouldn't work. And that happens a lot. Everybody's got examples of that. The cannon, the guy holding the horses by the cannon, the horses went away, but the guy holding the horses stayed until somebody did an analysis and finds that out. So these errors get passed along, and that's happened with the SBA, as far as I'm aware, down to this very day. Now, a terrific book came out a couple of years ago. I thought maybe it would have a chance at impacting this. Leonard Schlesinger and Charlie Kiefer, two top people. Leonard, at the time, president of Babson College, #1 school, ranked every year, #1 school in entrepreneurship. Charlie Kiefer, all through Peter Senge's book, The Learning Organization. So they write this book, Just Start. And it captured the essence of what I've been talking about for years. And I thought, well, this is a great book. It's Harvard Business Review Press, two really good people writing it. This is going to take off like a rocket. The SBA has got to pay attention to this. No such luck. It just bombed. It's a great book. Poor marketing of the book, in my opinion. Amar Bahiti's book, the article that I read expanded into a book, The Origin and Evolution of New Businesses. I go to SBA events. How many of you read Dr. Now, this is a book that Inc. magazine said it was the most important book about startup ever written at the time it first came out. And I asked the SBA, have you read this book? No, we haven't read that book. They just keep reading what happened last year. Let's put a little more in the budget. It's just an outrage. We set up this tax-funded enterprise to snuff the entrepreneurial spirit out of America. So we're trying to counter that. And it's been on, paper bags and rubber bands and paper clips and limping along. But I have had a generous benefactor that has offered a little bit of seed money, and we're going to be sharpening things up just a little bit. And but we're going to be going in the general direction that's evolved out of these last couple of decades that I've been doing these little startup workshops that we now call Idea Cafe Startup Praxis. And we're going to use Praxis because it's got a little edginess to it. And that's really what you're doing. You get together, and it is very much a praxis. And, the root word, maybe you could translate it literally practice, but it has more of an edge to that. It's a South American pulling together of, the Chancellor Chop, Rebecca Chop at the University of Denver has written a really fine book called, and this was years ago, The Praxis of Suffering, where people that are suffering come together and help each other. And that's really what happens in these Idea Cafe startup workshops at their best, is people that are struggling come together and help each other. Not that I'm so smart, not that anybody leading one of these groups is so smart, although the people leading the groups tend to start thinking they're so smart. I do that. I tend to think, I've done this so long, I can tell other people what to do, which is not true. But what we can do is provide an environment where that answer within can be drawn out of the person. And it's very much a faith-based enterprise, this business startup enterprise. And this idea that you can prove it scientifically as if it were chemistry or physics is just, I say I'm a recovering MBA because a lot of what I learned in graduate business school, I've had to overcome to be truly helpful to people who are trying to start something new. And it's just a different animal. And I don't know of any startup class that captures the essence of this, because it's just like with the Bell system saying, don't use scripts. It's just like that guy holding the horses. We've got the wrong message about startup. It keeps being passed along. And Dr. Edmund Phelps can see it reflected in the economic statistics. We get excited and think we're very creative because of the cell phone apps and, you know, things like that that are coming out. And Dr. Phelps just shakes his head and laughs and says, you know, we're losing the edge that we had, this vital economy. 80% of the people hate their job. What's going to change it? Well, we want to try to help change it. And now there's a book that came out of Babson about teaching entrepreneurship. They've done a conference at Babson for years about how to propagate the faith of startup. Primarily, it's, you know, the same market research, careful strategic planning. Now, Babson puts a little bit of an edge on it. I think that's why they maybe get put to the top of the heap, but it's really pretty much the same thing. And these ladies, they're all women. You know, the women that get mad when it's all men. I kind of feel that way when it's all, and it, you know, it has a tendency, these networking groups and all the ladies, and it's sort of business by tea party. You know, that's not the way business has worked in the past either. It's not been this going and hanging out and drinking and making connections. It's been rifle shots of making a list, making phone calls, setting appointments, going out, closing the sale. And that's not happening today. And it's facilitated by all this crazy thinking, I think, but anyway, they wrote this book, The Teaching of Entrepreneurship, and they say they have a method and it's comprised of practices. And I thought, well, you know, that's pretty good to have a method and have practices that support it. I think maybe we should do that, and we're going to. But here are their practices. The practice, this is to start a business. This is what they're teaching now at Babson, other colleges that use this. The practice of play. Oh, the practice of empathy. Oh, the practice of creation, the practice of experimentation, the practice of reflection. Well, those three, I'd say it a little bit. And so then they have exercises to practice play. That's how they start in these classes. Okay. Well, we're going to have the Small Business Chamber of Commerce method and our practices. And this is really what we've been doing, but we're going to package it so that people can understand, I think, a little bit better what I've been thinking. And we're going to try it here in Denver. And if it works as well as I think it's going to, we're going to be looking for people to be ambassadors with their local chamber to do the same thing wherever it is you live. Wherever you're watching right now, if you don't have this, come to Denver, visit. If you like it, we'll help you get one started there. But our method is comprised of 4 practices. And the first is the practice of imagination. You know, my dad was very, very big on imagination. He had a very successful business, and he'd been exposed to some teaching at the First Baptist Church of Amarillo that was just terrific. The senior boys had a class with the manager of the Board and Milk Company, Pinky Vineyard, who was also on the board of the Boys Ranch, did a lot of good in Amarillo. I don't know how it all ended up. I've tried to research, I've tried to find out more, but my dad was affected very positively by what Mr. Vineyard taught. And one of them was your imagination. And, you know, my dad, we'd be driving along, he'd say, look around you. Everything you see started as someone's idea. It was in their imagination. And I guess Mr. Vineyard has said every home ought to have a Montgomery Ward's catalog in it, because kids look through the Montgomery Ward's catalog and they learn to dream about what it would be like to have this, that, or the other thing. Now, you can put that down in today's world as maybe too much consumerism, especially given the gush that we've got now. But there's, you know, it's the Montgomery Ward's catalog, maybe in Marshall McLuhan's terms, was a hot media. It's more involving in some ways than just kind of leaning back and things presented over the internet and on TV and so forth. But imagination, now where we practice that is at what we do every Friday afternoon here in Denver, 2 o'clock, the Idea Cafe Startup Praxis. And this is free and open to everybody. We just ask you to bring your brain for the brainstorming. We do two things. We share our startup experience. And so it's a little bit like looking at the Montgomery Ward's catalog. As you hear in a small setting, people talk about how they got started. And then we do a brainstorming type technique that I learned from Charlie Kiefer. It's called a fresh thought hunt. It's sort of, we call it brainstorming style fresh thought hunt because we also apply the rules of brainstorming, which is another technique that we've used in the past. But this is green light thinking. It's divergent thinking, chunking up in NLP terms. I didn't take NLP. I had a friend that was really into it, so I vicariously benefited from some of it. But the chunking up, and then you have to evaluate. We don't do that at the Idea Cafe, but how to evaluate is always a good brainstorming topic. And then A, take action. IDEA. I is inspiration or identify the target. D, develop alternatives, hearing the startup stories, brainstorming. E, evaluation, and A, take action. And if you go through that loop quickly, and it's very similar to the ODA, O-O-D-A, ODA, which I always forget what they mean, but it's fighter pilots use it. You orient yourself and so forth. But these 4 steps are powerful. And we talk about that a little bit at the startup workshop, not as much as we should. I need to hear them myself occasionally, repeated to me, but that's imagination. Faith is very important. If you don't have a foundation of faith, the big picture, it's very, now we have a faith sharing group, Saturday afternoons, 4 o'clock, Panera, at Perkins on Bucktail in Colorado, 4 o'clock. Come, it's not any particular faith, but it's a place where we can share how we've seen God moving in our lives that week. And these are all optional. Some might want to come to the Idea Cafe, especially when they're headed in a new direction with their work. We feel like we're helpful to people who aren't sure what they're going to do Monday morning. You've gone through the week, you're not sure what you're going to do, but you need to start a new career. Maybe you're just job hunting, but you're going to start a new career, not sure how to go about that, or maybe you have a way of going about it, but it's not working. You need a new way. Maybe you're starting a new project or campaign or a new business. Friday afternoons at the Idea Cafe Startup Praxis, Panera Bread, 13th and Grant. Saturday afternoons, the faith sharing at Perkins. And then Saturday evening is the practice of thinking. And thinking, I think, is best taught with the Socratic method. Socrates Cafe, we've been doing one here in Denver for a long time. And the first one started Friday nights at the same place we do the Idea Cafe. Now the one I'm at every week is at the University of Denver, 6:30 in the Anderson Learning Commons and Anderson Academic Commons. It used to be Penrose Library. We're in current periodicals, so come right over and sit down. We pick a topic. Person that suggests the topic shares, and then we pick 3 people at random to share. Then we take turns asking each other questions until final thoughts, when everybody shares one final thought about the topic. It is a lot of fun, and I believe it's a powerful learning technique. So you bring a topic that you really want to learn more about. You share what you've already learned. You probably learn a little bit as you put that together. Then you hear 3 other people talk about it. These questions come up. It leads you to your next round of independent study. So Socrates Cafe, and then the final practice is the practice of recovery. And this is more important in our society than ever before, the bounce, that you hit a rough spot. We all have bad days. The most successful person in the world is going to have a bad day. Occasionally, you need to recover from it. So recovery is really a universal practice. Down in Albuquerque, his name's eluding me, but he's written a book called Breathing Underwater. And the breathing underwater is the 12 steps is applied to everyone. In a way, we're all addicted to something. That's Richard Rohr, Father Richard Rohr, feels like we're in today's world all addicted to something. Some people are addicted to work. Some people are addicted to food. So it's not necessarily you're an alcoholic. So the recovery meeting that we have is called Root and Branch. It's an open AA meeting, but we invite everybody to come to learn about the 12 steps. We study the first steps, and we also are an introductory group to meditation. We talk a little bit about meditation and then actually do a 5-minute meditation. So it's not something you necessarily go to forever. We hope we could develop a core group that supports it and is there regularly. But you might come once and get all you need from it to learn about the 12 steps. And you might come because you have some friend or relative in recovery and you want to learn more. It'd be maybe better to go to an Al-Anon group. That's what we'll suggest to you. But come to Root and Branch. That's every Monday at 1311 York Street on the 3rd floor, Root and Branch. Now it's 4:30. We've just changed the time. So it's 4:30, 1311 York Street. And those are our 4 practices. Recovery, and we say recovery first, but it's also recovery last and recovery always. We always are having to recover. So these 12 steps are a powerful, powerful set of tools for recovering from life's hardships. So the practices that we talk about is not play. We talk about recovery. We talk about thinking, the Socrates Cafe, and we talk about faith at our faith sharing group. And we talk about imagination at the Idea Cafe Startup Workshop. Now, tying it all together is the Franklin Circle peer groups, and they're independent, self-directed learning groups based on the work of Malcolm Knowles that kind of invented the term self-directed learning group, but it's what Ben Franklin was doing back with his friends in Philadelphia in 1727. They started the first group that met every week for nearly 35 years. They stopped 10 years before the American Revolution because they pretty much all died except Ben Franklin, who lived an incredibly long life back then. 10 years before the American Revolution, then Franklin had overseas duties, and but he always was a club person involved in groups. And the Junto is the model for something we call Franklin Circles. We think everyone should be in one. You can be in one with your friends and associates. Google how to start a Franklin Circle. And there's a wiki that's evolved over time that we initiated that will help you start one on your own, or will help you. Now, I'm starting a Franklin Circle right now. It'll probably be the last one I ever start. I've started several. And this is going to be the alpha group for these branches that we're going to have with local chambers of commerce. And if you'd like to be doing pretty much these practices in the way that I've just described in your local city, we'd love to talk to you. Come and visit, just show up. No RSVPs required, but we have a big online presence. One place to start is the smallbizchamber.org website, and or just call me and let's talk. Sometimes that's the easiest thing. Number is 303-861-1447. That's 303-861-1447. That's a little bit about where we've been, what we're doing now, what we see ahead for ourselves. If we grow rapidly, we believe we can have a big impact on the well-being of America, and that this is something that it's a bit selfish because we'll get the most out of it, but it's, you know, doing well by doing good. And we've been doing things that we've learned from for the past 20 years here. We've put them together in this package. We're going to sharpen up our online presence, and we're looking for a few good people to start businesses of their own to show that this practice, this method works. And we've got that over the past years, but not with this package tied together the way it is. I'll also be doing another one of these probably next week where it's just me talking, and I may cover the same ground. If you've got input for me, if I'm saying something that's totally out of bounds or inappropriate, or if there's something I should be saying that I'm leaving out, you'd do me a great favor if you'd call and give me your feedback. So number is 303-861-1447. And until next week, 10 o'clock, we're here each Friday morning, and this is sponsored by the Small Business Chamber of Commerce. Our purpose is to help you do more good work. And let's remember, this life is very short, so let's go get started.